Welcome, best-selling romance author Kayla Grosse. Yay!
Hi.
We've had you on the show before, and it's awesome to speak to you again because now you have a whole new book out and a series. So, in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Yeah, so I started writing back in 2019 with the new adult fantasy romance novel, which is my Wish Revelations. And I totally thought I was going to be this like fantasy writer. And then I got swept up in the romance novel scene and came out with my first book. Well, my not my first book, but my first rom-com, I guess you could say, starring a plus size babe rock star. I Like You Like That. And that took off, and so many people loved it, and I enjoyed writing it. And so then I decided to write another book with another plus size babe, but this time cowboys, and I turned it into a series. So that's the short version.
Well, and now that you've kind of gotten a taste for romance, is that kind of where you see your trajectory, or is that kind of what's in your wheelhouse right now? That's like what's kind of doing it for you is kind of writing that romance, or you think you'll go back to fantasy? Because it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my fantasy was also a romance, so I definitely have always like been writing romance, but I think I will go back to fantasy at some point. I have actually it's before I started I Like You Like That, I was writing a mermaid book with a fat mermaid. And so, and I like had a map and everything, and it's half written. So at some point, I would love to go back and finish it because I love that story. It's kind of it's spicy and fun, and it's got like fae and mermaids and different things happening. I definitely though see myself as for sure like sticking in the romance genre, whether that be cowboys, rock stars, or mermaids, I guess.
Listen, you've had me at like plus size mermaid. I am there. Like, take me there. I want to
Yeah.
see that. I want to be in that world. I want to be immersed where there is like plus size mermaids and like all these fantasy characters that look kind of like me. I want it. I need it. Well, and like you kind of mentioned, we talked about like rock star romance, that I Like You Like That a book last time you were here. And now you have a whole new release out with the cowboy flair called Rein Me In. What influenced you to go from rock stars to cowboys?
Well, I am a cowgirl myself. I've grown up around horses, and I used to, well, not used to. So I did own a horse when I was younger, and I like showed horses. I was more in the English world, though, not so much the like rodeo world or anything like that.
Mm.
And then I sold my horse to move out to LA after film school and kind of took a break from that. And then about 5 or so years ago, I started to get back into horses again here in Los Angeles. And then the book, I Like You Like That, actually afforded me the ability to buy my horse that I have now, Atlas, who I've had since February. And but I had already been like kind of getting back into the cowboy stuff prior to that. Like I was leasing horses and stuff. And I liked the cowboy romance genre, and I had started reading a few books in that genre and loved them. But I was like, what? Like none of these girls are plus size. They're all, the like buckle bunny type, like very as they call them in the books, like petite, tiny, blonde, usually, the kind of like classical romance heroine, I guess, especially in cowboy books. And so I said, you know what? With the horseback riding world, there is a huge bias specifically for larger women riding horses. Like if you go on TikTok and you see a larger woman riding a horse, that comment section 9 times out of 10 is going to be pretty gnarly. The weight of the person on the horse, and that horse can't carry this person, da 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 da. And I was like, you know what? I've always felt that women in the horse world have always had to also deal with body image issues. So I said, you know what? I want to write a cowboy romance with a plus size cowgirl. And that's really where the like spark came from to write Rein Me In. And then I went to San Diego with some friends actually right after I Like You Like That came out. And we were outside a bull riding bar, and I had this moment with like the bull wrangler, I called him, like where he was the one like putting on people on the mechanical bull. And we weren't in the bar. We were outside. You could watch it. Like there was glass and stuff. Like, so I could hear him or whatever, but we could see people riding bulls. And this guy like that was working, I was standing next to four of my friends and he kept like looking at me and going like, you like, come here, come inside. And he did it like 4 or 5 times. And we almost went in there. Well, we tried to, but they had a cover and we were like, oh, we don't want to pay $20. Anyway, so that idea literally sparked the idea for Rein Me In. And I went home and I started writing it. And so those were the influences for Rein Me In.
I come from kind of a smallish Texas town. So like you had my heart at like when I started reading Rein Me In. And like several of the characters like in your cowboy romance kind of rep that plus size body. Just bless. Because that's what I grew up seeing. Right. And I do have friends, I have relatives who raise horses, who ride horses, who are involved in the rodeo. And like, that's just kind of what you see typically in the South. You see more of the plus size bodies more so than you do some of the smaller bodies. So like, that's why I was curious. Like, if you had ever been to the South, if you kind of based it upon experiences in the South, because like that just felt like true to me as a true Southern girl who knows, Southern hospitality and all the good food you eaten around here.
I haven't been to the South too much. I've been there here and there, but I really wanted this. I definitely like know what you're saying. And so that was in my mind for sure. I wanted the town to feel like almost like Sweet Home Alabama, but with like curvy women. Like, I don't know. It was one of those things where I realized after I wrote it, I was like, oh, everybody except for the parents, I think, are curvy. Like, and then the men, obviously, they're like, the typical romance guy would, but the women are definitely a little more curvaceous. And yeah, it was intentional for sure. And then not at the same time. Like, I think I've started to sort of just picture all women that I write in sort of like a curvaceous nature.
You were talking about the bull riding scene though, or I'm sorry, the mechanical bull riding thing. And listen, I know my friend, she was riding a mechanical bull and she's a plus size girl. She did better than all of us. Anyone who was like skinny, mid-sized, anybody. And when I tell you the men were making eyes at her afterwards.
Yeah, I'm sure.
There is something about that really get guys going. So like, especially if you can last a long time on the mechanical bull. So like, there's like, and that is a whole thing that I'm just glad you incorporated so much into this book, especially after I Like You Like That, where the main protagonist was plus size, but we just got to see more of it.
Yeah, it was really I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, like the I Like You Like That was a lot about like Birdie and her journey as a rock star who's living in this world where everybody around her is telling her to be a certain way, and she was dealing with the consequences of that world, and also like her dealing with her body image and her with Liam, and when they were kids, and him rejecting her, and her thinking it was about her weight and stuff like that. So there was a lot of I Like You Like This just had so many components of fat phobia and different things. And so with this book, I was just like, you know what? She's fat. She's happy with her body. Like, this book already has so many things going on in it emotionally, and that I didn't feel like that was necessary. And I also just wanted this town to be sort of this loving town that was very accepting and of people and their backgrounds and who they were and what they looked like. And so this book was very much more of like, they just are who they are, and it's more about their journey as as their characters versus what they physically look like.
Oh yeah, and you make a fantastic point. This book, Rein Me In, is such a departure from I Like You Like That. Very different in tone and what is being dealt with and everything like that. What the emotional journey of the characters. Did the book originally look different from what readers will find in the current version? And why did you decide to change some of the book?
Yeah, it definitely, in the beginning, when I first had the idea, I actually, that song, I don't know if you've heard it. It's by Cole Swindell, and they use the Heads Carolina, Tails California song in it, except he like makes a new song out of it. Anyway, so it's the same song, but different. And it's basically like he sees this girl and she's doing karaoke. This is what the song's about. She's doing karaoke, and then he's like falls in love with her. And so the whole song's like, let's jump in the car. We can go anywhere you want. Heads California, tails Carolina kind of thing. Like they use that. And it's this, love story, quote unquote, because all country songs are always a story, right? And I was like, oh, I kind of love that. Like this guy sees this girl across the bar and they go on a road trip together somehow. And like she was going to be had a divorce or something. And he was going to be, I don't know what he was going to be, but like, and then the book shifted. I was like, okay, no, it's going to be this thing. And like the brother, Kate originally was like way funny. And he was like, had a business where he was like selling steaks, like, it was like totally different. And then as I started writing, I lost my grandfather not this past May, but the previous May. And so I was dealing with that. And then in January of this year, I lost my friend Sally. And it was like my first dear friend that I've lost to cancer. And so I was kind of in this grief journey of my own, and it just evolved, I guess. Like the book just changed, and that always happens. I feel like when you're writing, especially if you're like me, I don't write with a outline. I try, but I will literally kind of roughly plot things out, and I never follow it ever. It always changes because I feel like my characters, they definitely speak to me. And they tell me where they want to go and what they want to have happen. And so the story always just evolves into sort of whatever is happening in my life and whatever the characters are telling me, I guess.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you lost your friend and your grandfather. And that was like, and you feel it through the book because you did take a very nuanced approach to it. Like I find the character arcs in the book are very like real and like they're raw and emotional. And the female protagonist is a little prickly, and she's dealing with her own loss, her own grief. And so is the male protagonist in his own way dealing with a lot of that personal turmoil. There was quite a bit of exploration of how grief is so personal and how it's hard to quantify one loss and how it affects people or how it's supposed to affect us. Was creating an introspective character arc always part of how you wanted to approach grief in a romance?
Yeah, I have always been like my writing, I feel like it's always been way more realistic. Like, and some people, it's not their cup of tea. Like when they read, they want to go off into another plane of existence, and that's totally fine. I like that too sometimes. I think it depends on whatever it is you want to read. But it's funny, when I first started writing this book, I told my friend, I was like, let's Nicholas Sparks this shit. Like I wanted to have it be like a sad book, but with like sex, but then also, romance and funny moments. And like some of my favorite scenes are the bull riding scenes and like the bar every time they're at Nighthawk. Like I wanted Nighthawk to be sort of this central location where like fun things happen. So if you're going to Nighthawk, like stuff's going to be fun there. And I wanted all my characters to just be very well-rounded, but also have things that are happening in their lives outside of, Nighthawk. Like I wanted there to be I wanted everybody to have something that was going on for them, whether that was, like I have because I'm a really big into side characters, like, and people tell me this a lot, like, oh, you build up your side characters so well. Like, I love all your side characters, sometimes more than your main. And I was like, I know I have the tendency to do that because I love them too. I'm like, oh, I want them to be like, have stuff going on too. But yeah, I really wanted all of my characters to just sort of have this nice arc of like they start, point A, and then they're sort of figuring their way through it as the book goes on.
Well, and that's so interesting to me that you say you don't outline, and yet you did such a fantastic job, like building all these character arcs. Like you said, you have these wonderful side characters that all have their own like personal arcs. And like you give them a lot of background for these side characters that I kind of want more of them. Of course, since this is a series, I'm hoping we'll get more of them. Was Raimi and kind of like different building the series? Did you go into it thinking it was going to be a series, or did it kind of spiral to become a series?
I knew pretty early on that I at least am going to write Cade's book. I don't know beyond like that necessarily, but I knew that I wanted for sure to write both brothers because as I started writing, Cade kind of became one of my favorites.
Mhm.
And I've never written such a young character. Like Cade's 21. Most of my characters that I've ever written are at least 24 usually, which to me makes a big difference. 21, 24. It's like
Mhm.
that's to me at least I felt a lot different when I was 21 versus 24, you know. And but he's also kind of like this old soul who's got so much going on. And like I said, he initially, like when I look at my notes from, because what I like to do, since I grew up in the film, well, not grew up, but I went to school for film and stuff, is I build my like start of my books like a movie pitch. So I'll have the characters listed out and then I'll put, you know, their personality traits and kind of their character arcs and where their starting points are. And like I said, Cade was totally different. He was like the life of the party, which he still kind of is, but and he's super funny and super charismatic and he's like he's has a thriving business where he's selling off like, you know, beef, like Texas grade meat and like, you know, like organic, blah blah blah, like all these things. I don't know, he was just a totally different character. And then literally I started writing Gavin's chapter and he changed immediately. It was like, he just went from, he still has some of those qualities, but he became just this other character. And then I felt really drawn to writing him as a big part of Gavin's arc because I felt
Mhm.
like, you know, he's the younger brother, like Gavin's older brother. He feels like he has to take care of his younger brother, but in actuality, they're not that much older than one another, like 24, 21, you know, it's not that huge of a difference. But so I really liked kind of trying to figure out how they would sort of exist and how their grief was handled differently between them within the family as well, and how the mom treated each of them differently and how that impacted Gavin's storyline. And then in my brain, I also had in the back of my mind, like what was happening with Cade while he was off doing his own thing.
Mhm.
So there's lots of like little Easter eggs in the book about where, like what he was doing and where he was and who he's with and stuff like that.
Well, and it's so interesting. I keep forgetting Kate's like 21 because there are moments like I kind of forget he seems like a lot older. Like you said, just like he
Yeah,
seems
totally.
like an old soul. So I kind of when you said that just now, I was like, he's 21. And I was like, oh yeah, he is 21. But
Yeah.
it's just he
Yeah.
does feel older.
Yeah. He has moments where he's like, I tried to make him pretty explosive.
Mm,
I remember one beta reader was like, oh, he went from like hot to cold really quick. And I was like, well, he's 21. Like he's like,
yeah.
he doesn't have this sort of filter yet that you get as an adult where you're like, calm it down. Okay. You know, he's just like, I'm mad, you know. Uh
Yeah, like that life experience, right? We have as a, to kind of okay, simmer down a little bit. Like let's kind of figure this out or let's just kind of keep a cool head about it, let's not show all our cards. But he's going through grief like you said. So sometimes those manifest in different ways of handling that. And I'm glad you showed like such a distinction between different types of grief because people do grieve in their own ways, and it was a really interesting dynamic you showed between like all the characters and how they handled that and how they actually interacted with each other throughout it.
Yeah, I think I tried to kind of touch on like all the different experiences of grief that even I've had, because you know, there'll be certain people that die that, you know, I knew or acquaintances with or something, and you kind of have like there's different types of grief, right? Or like a pet dying, that's a different
Mhm.
type of grief. And you know, I have friends who have gone through really interesting experiences of grief, like child loss, different things. And so how they deal with grief and how, my mom lost her father. I lost my grandfather. Like, how is
Yeah.
that different? You know, and so of course, like Blake's parents are going to handle things differently than, and she also has been gone for 5 years. So it's kind of like they lost two children and like, how did they sort of move on from that? And then, you know, and then you've got this sort of Southern family that I tried to write very traditionally, like the mom and the grandma, the matriarch of the family. And like, then you've got the older son who's now the head of the household, but is he
Mhm.
really? And like, how is he dealing with the grief? And how's the younger brother? And yeah, so I really tried to think of all those things of like, because I wanted people that read it to be able to say like, oh, like I can relate to X character, but I see how, I don't know, maybe heal them too, depending on like seeing how people interact with each other during that grief process, I guess.
There's a personal element to all the grief. And I think you did do a wonderful job of trying to show how that interaction, and you focused on the grief, but then you also, I think you did a really wonderful job of like picking up and saying, okay, like, where do we go from here? And kind of worked in that dynamic of like moving on from the grief, but like still settle, like you're settling in it, you're trying to reconcile with it, but you're still trying to move on or trying to move into the new normal. So I
Mhm.
think that was really interesting. And I think you handled it very wonderfully, especially with like I said, there wasn't just the main character, the main male protagonist who was dealing with it. It was also the female protagonist, which was
Mhm.
like a double, like you kind of had a double whammy there.
Yeah, I didn't
So
know if it would be too much when I first started writing it, but then I actually liked it because I was like, what happens if two people that are going through separate processes of grief, but also like he lost his best friend too
right.
5 years prior. So it
Mhm.
was like, but I felt like Gavin, like what I liked about him was he was almost like this pillar of like, he recognized that grief was hard and like things have changed and stuff like that. But he also, in his own way, had kind of figured out how to process it. So to me, he was almost like the one that had the best handle on it, even though
Mm.
his translated more into like doing, you know what I mean? There's always like the doer of the grief where it's like, oh, well, that happened, but like I still gotta go and like move on and stuff like that. And what I liked about Blake was she's kind of opposite. She's sort of stuck in this
Yes.
grief. And so them together, I felt like was good because she was able to say, like, well, what about you? Like, who's taking care of you and helping him sort of process through that and lean on her versus, and then he was able to be like, same thing with her, but help her in a way that was like, it's not your fault, like there, and holding her in a way that helped her kind of get out of that unstuck place, if that makes sense. So, and she also was very similar to Kate in a lot of ways, I felt like. So, and I did that on purpose. I was trying to do like sort of a mirror, and I don't know if it worked, but I was trying to do like where he would have never really realized it, but she was also sort of like like his brother, like not like he was dating his brother, but you know
Yep.
what I mean?
But yes.
Like he was able to help her because he was also like dealing with his brother and having to, and
Mhm.
like when it's a sibling, it's harder because it's like, family curses. And so you get angry. But then here's this woman that he's like falling in love with who's kind of similar to his brother. So, like, by helping her through and being more compassionate with her in that process, he was able to be more compassionate with his brother because of that.
The romance in particular, too, when you kind of started building that romance, those romance pieces, it came from a place of like interest, of like, I'm interested in you, and the tension, as opposed to like shared trauma. Like, and I think that's an important distinction, I think, is like having this romance grow from places of we're healing together, or we are interested in each other. There's this sexual tension already and everything like that established, instead of like there's just a traumatic experience we happen to share. I think
Mhm.
you did a very layered approach with that, and I think you did a great job. Was it difficult to write like that shared traumatic experience while simultaneously building the romance in there?
Sometimes, but what I think helped me with that was that Blake, like, the incident happens and then she was like, bye. She's like, I'm out. She was just like she couldn't physically, like, she went, I think, from being, this happy, joyful, like Gavin describes her a couple of times from his perspective of her, like, this barrel racer that's winning championships and she's sleeping with guys and having a good time. And, she's got this fun brother as like her best friend. And then it's like the incident happens and she's like, she checks out. She's like she
Mm.
physically cannot handle it. Because it was almost to her like losing her twin, even though they were 5 years apart, in age. And so she had to like go off and Gavin, in a way, like he's always though, he's like, again, he's the pillar. He stays. He's like, he's there. Obviously, he was young at the time when it happened, but he stays, he's there, he's working for his family. So I don't know, it kind of felt like it wasn't too hard because in a way, even though they shared the experience, they didn't at the same time. So in a way, Blake, like she never really thought of Gavin as anything other than, her brother's friend that she saw here and there. And so versus he always kind of like saw her and admired her and, the hot older sister kind of thing. And it wasn't too hard in that sense, just because I didn't feel like their traumas crossed too much. Like they did, but they didn't. That's why I think he was able to also like help her through it, because he had stayed and processed like the brothers, his best friends, like death versus she hadn't. So, and then, he had all this other stuff going on, but thankfully that was actually probably pretty easy, the romance. But I'm also a romance, like a romantic. So like, that's also my favorite thing to write, is that build of the romance,
It's usually top of mind to me because I sometimes when like therapy sessions, they always tell you, you want to build healthy bonds as opposed to like a shared trauma bond. So like,
yeah,
I was like very like thankful. And like, I love that you incorporated this, that they had this, they kind of, like you said, but they kind of didn't have this kind of shared trauma, like they both lost someone very close to him. She lost her brother. He lost his best friend, but it looked so different. And it wasn't necessarily something they necessarily like, it didn't build the romantic pieces on top of that. And it didn't like, that's not where it spurned from. It spurned from like, from the place of healing. So that was an important thing that I found that was really interesting and like just a different approach to it that I think is just getting more nuanced, I think, and is really starting to come more into fruition of like that mental health portion, especially in the romance area, which we're starting to see more of, and I think is really important.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting. I'll always get like one or two reviews or something that says, and this happened with I Like You Like That too. Like, thanks so much for including therapy. Like, as a therapist, I'm really like happy that you included this. And I've gone to therapy before and after a traumatic thing, and it helped me, and so I felt like it was interesting. Like I kind of had Blake be sort of that person that's like, like I don't really know if I need it, and her mom's like, hello. And so, but I really wanted to, I always think it's good to like, what I tried to do with this book though, is like not say like, that's what she had to do, but just as an option. Like, if this is something that you feel like her mom was like, I feel like this could be good for you, and letting like sort of process through her own stuff with the help of her experiences with Gavin and being back in town and stuff like that. And also I think it was good for Blake because I really like her relationship with Gavin gave her something outside of her grief to like deal with, so she was helping him with the ranch stuff while he's helping her with the grief stuff. So it was a way for her to like actually think outside of herself for the first time in 5 years, I felt like, because she had just escaped her trauma, and then came back to deal with it. And she had to deal with other things too at the same time, which is, I always, again, I think is good. You'd like to be able to move on and do things, but still process at the same time.
And like you said, like some people, it's just a different type of grief, different way of processing it. Some people like to get lost, in their thoughts or escapism, use some form of escapism, but then other, like maybe reading a romance. But some other people are just doers, right? And that's what helps them get out of their own head and kind of like work through that. So like, it just depends on kind of, and where you fall on the spectrum and kind of what type of grief it is. It's just so different for everyone. And I like that you showed just that all those different kind of shades of different types of grief and how people deal with them. And you gave options like therapy in there, because I do think, I do remember that from I Like You Like That, which I thought was really cool. Because I do like to see like those type of things integrated in romance, because it should be, we should not be afraid to say those things or say like, therapy is an option. Remember that therapy is an option out there for us when dealing with those.
Yeah. And it'll be really interesting to see what Kay does, because I feel like his book is going to be, it's going to be intense. Like I kind of told people I haven't started writing it yet, but like in my brain, I mean, and as you know, from reading the book, like there's a lot going on with him. And so it's going to be interesting to see. And like his love interest, at least so far in my mind. Like I said, I haven't written it yet, so it could
Mm.
change. She has like no trauma really. Like she kind of has some like body image stuff, but like she doesn't, like Kate's gonna be like, whoa, like you've got a lot going on, sir, So it'll be interesting to see. And like you said, I like the word escapism. Like that is Kate. Like he is like escapism 101. Like that's sort of his deal.
Oh, I'm so interested to read his book. But how has that, like, and that's a good question. Like, how has it been like writing a series as opposed to a standalone? Has it been like a little different in the like thinking about like Cade's book in the process or kind of thinking ahead? Like, has the writing
Yeah.
process and like just like thinking of all these different pieces been a little bit different?
Yeah. So my new adult book is actually a duology, and I haven't posted I haven't published the second book yet. Sorry, people who have read it. It's been like 4 years. That's why I say sorry. And so I was hesitant to like potentially do this. That's why I also with Rain Man, like I really wanted to give it though like a solid ending. Like, okay, so that way if I decide I need to take a break from it or something and come back to it, like nobody's left on like pins and needles waiting for like a cliffhanger or something like that. Because it is different. It's hard because you have to remember what I wrote about him, and like I have to line up timelines. And because in this specific book too, it's not like I'm just going from like in order. Like I have to go back and write from the beginning of this book again. So it's like, so there's going to be repetitive things, like repetitive scenes with like obviously where I've so that's nice. I can use what I've already written, but at the same in some scenes, but at the same time, it's like you have to go back and be like, okay, wait, where was he? What was he doing? Like, does this make sense? And it was the same. That's I think I wish to has taken me longer as well, is because on top of the timelines and stuff, I've also got magical things happening, and so I have to remember like how magic works, and there's a lot. So it's definitely there's a lack of freedom sometimes I feel like in writing series, at least for me. So sometimes that is my shortcoming, is like when I feel restricted, sometimes I feel like I don't want to do it, so I have to really focus, but I promise I will write. I'm always like, I've got the second Wish book written. I just need to edit it, and I just have to sit down and do it. And like with Rain Me, and it'll be the same, or the next book, it'll be the same thing. Like, okay, I'm excited to write his book though, so I'm sure it'll be fine. It's just getting out of your own head. Sometimes I feel like with series is the important part.
Well, and I think it's a really gross part as an author, because I think I feel like a standalone is very different from like writing a duology, like because like you said, you don't have to think necessarily of all these other like pieces that'll go in a later book, right? You don't have to necessarily consider that. But I'm really glad that you kind of like you're approaching it in a way that works for you. Like you're just like, okay, I know I really want to do it, and here's what I'm going to do, because you're going the approach of like just 2 books. At least you're not committing yourself to like I'm going to make it a 10 book series or something like that. Something crazy, I think it's really cool that you're thinking already of like, okay, here's what the timeline is going to look like, because too, that's, I know readers are so voracious and they love those things. Like, so they love those little Easter eggs, or they love like going back and seeing like from maybe a different perspective. So like, those are things that they will definitely catch on to pretty quickly.
I get asked all the time if I'm going to write, Ben and Ren from I Like You Like That.
And yes, please. Thank you. I love that. Even as a novella, please.
Oh, yeah, it's so funny. Like, I always like I was saying, so people, they always ask me that, and I'm just like, but they were wrapped up in a pretty bow. Like, I know, but everybody loves them. So maybe someday I'll do a novella, like, and see, because people just love them so much. But it's just this funny thing where I was like, when I wrote I Like You Like That, because of what happened with Wish, I was like, this is not a series, it's a standalone, like,
That's funny.
But they're married, guys. Like, they're good. And they're like, no, we want to know what happened. I'm like, oh,
I know. I know. I figured that was the end of this story, but I just love the character so much. I was just like, but Ben
Yeah.
and Ren are so cute. I mean, they even have like matching names. How can you not love?
Ben was one of my favorite characters to write. Like, and it's funny because Ben and Ren in that book, they're both like characters based off friends of mine who dated in high school. They're not together anymore. Haven't been since high school, but so I always tell them like, you guys are like the favorites. Everybody loves you, and they just think it's so funny because we're all still friends and everything, and so it's
Aw.
kind of this funny thing. But
That's so
yeah,
funny though that you kind of incorporate like real people. No wonder they feel like really three-dimensional, like real characters. Cause I do love your characters. Your characters do feel like real. Like I feel like I do know them some, like because they do have a great background. They have great personality. You consciously or subconsciously kind of like say, like, I might take a little piece of this person, a little piece of that person, kind of make a new character or something like that.
sometimes I can genuinely say with Rain Me, and I felt like all of those characters were in my brain, and of
Mm,
course, like they probably have attributes of people that I know for sure.
mm.
But I like you like that. No, it was very intentional. I was like, okay, this is Lene, this is Tyler, this is Caitlin, this is, because it was sort of this I was writing a lot of like high school experiences of my own and things like that. So it was sort of like a nod to my high school friends. And it was kind of funny because Rain Me In, that trip that I took to San Diego was with three of the girls from my high school group, one of them being Lene, and that was why I named her Ren, because we called her
Aw,
Len. So, and so it was
cute.
funny, like we were on that trip and I Like You Like That had just released and it was like going crazy. And so they were all like, oh my God, that's so crazy that like a book with like us kind of in it is, I don't know, like, no, this is crazy. And then we went, to that bar, and that's what sparked the idea for the mechanical bull, and like the meet cute of Gavin seeing her across the room and being like, you come ride the bull. And then
Mhm.
I literally wrote the book, and then it's out 7 months later. And so my friends are like, that's crazy that we were on a trip and you got your idea from that. And now it's a whole book. They're like, wow, like, it always blows their mind. So I was like, maybe I need to keep going on trips with that.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, you obviously need to have more experiences with these girls or like with your friends so you can keep writing books for us.
I'm working currently on a Christmas novella that I think I'm going to put underneath a pen name. And
Okay.
this is like the first book where I'm like, nope, there's literally no experience. Like nobody is anybody. It's just a dirty Christmas book, basically.
Perfect.
And so it'll be really
Perfect.
interesting. I'm interested to see like how people take that, because that's why I'm writing it under a pen name, because it's such departure from like what we were just talking about, having these characters with like, but I find that I can't not, like, as I started writing my new book, I was like, oh, like my characters can't not have all these like depths to them and like things, like even when I'm just trying to write a novella, they're in my brain, they become these like complex beings, and I'm like, it's just a dirty Christmas book, like stop it. Can't. I'm like, I feel like I have to include, like, I started writing about like, because he's this twin brother, and I started writing about why they're different. I'm like, no, like stop, like, and I was like, before you know it, this is gonna be a full 400-page book, like knock it off.
So like that'll be interesting to see too how a novella kind of how different it is for you. Because I know some people can
I've never
write
written
short.
one
Some people can
before.
write short. Some people can't.
I know. So we'll see. I've never written before. That's why I'm saying it might ended up just being like a book that's 200 pages or something. Who knows? But
Mm.
I'm like, we'll see what happens. I like took like a weekend off of work in July, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna sit down and like try to bang it out. Again, I have to remind myself, like, quick action, like things are happening quickly in novellas, like
Mm.
there's no time to, like, again, what we were just talking about, like develop these crazy layered storylines I mean, you can, but that's not why people are going to come and read this book. So I just have to remember, like, go to the action quickly. So as soon as I start writing like something kind of departure, I'm like, no, delete, like go back.
Yeah, that's something I've always talked about with a couple of girlfriends of mine, because we've talked about doing like novellas or like anthologies together with little novellas in them. But like, we're just like, can we write short? Because that is like you said, that's the key to it. The action's always happening. We're always moving on pretty much the next thing, unless we're going to unless it's like some of certain scenes that are drawn out, but it's only very few of them. And we've talked so much about these amazing books about Rain Me In, I Like You Like That. So where can listeners find your books and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so my books are all on Amazon. So that's the best place to buy them. I believe I Like You Like That. That's on Barnes and Noble. But yeah, so Amazon's the best place to buy my books, or www.kaylagrosse.com if you want a signed book with some fun stickers and things.
Ooh.
And oh my gosh, all of my social medias are like different. That was bad on me, but at Kayla Grosse on Twitter, at Kayla Writes Life on Instagram, and at Kayla Grosse Writer on TikTok. So yeah, those are all the places you can find me.